I don't know if YouTube's gonna hound on me for this one, but I don't think I can say the word Nazi too much before this video got demonetized. And I don't really care. These people are actual Nazis, and no amount of euphemism and demonetization are gonna stop me from calling them as such. So huge thanks to everyone who support me on this channel through the means down below, and you can do so too. I certainly have high expectations for Wolfenstein: The New Order. It promises itself to be a modern shooter that is quite different than we used to have at the time, with more open levels, more ridiculous set pieces, and all of the elements of the classic FPS that you know and love. And boy, oh boy, this game really delivered. Excellent gameplay, satisfying gunplay, solid level design filled with alternative routes and secrets, and all of that combined with an engaging narrative that puts all of that mindless violence into proper context, one that manages to balance a good level of gritty realism and over-the-top action. By combining all of the things that make old first-person shooters great with the things that make new first-person shooters great, Wolfenstein: The New Order produces the kind of experience that you can only get from a lightning in a bottle, one that simply can't be replicated, especially by people who care more about being current year rather than making a good game. The sequels try to replicate that spirit, but unfortunately they all fall into the same pit that a lot of bad sequels drop themselves into. So let's talk about Wolfenstein: The New Order, the only good modern Wolfenstein game that you all should play, and completely ditch the cash grab zombie prequel, the direct-to-DVD quality sequel, and a ticket straight into the most irritating part of Zoomer Twitter that you'll have to enter by having your head being whacked several times with a bike clock.
What have you been up to, Blazkowicz?
Shooting, stabbing, strangling Nazis.
In Wolfenstein: The New Order, you play as William B.J. Blazkowicz, who alongside other soldiers in World War II go in a last-ditch effort to regain victory over the Nazis, particularly towards a specific Nazi officer named Death's Head. After forcing to choose one of your allies to die, Blazko escapes from captivity, got shrapnels into his head and body, and unfortunately suffers from some sort of a vegetative state for several years, where it turns out that the Nazis have taken over the world, an unfortunate nightmare that he and so many other characters has to suffer from. So can Blazko got himself back to form and retake the world back from all of those evil Nazis. The game itself is a first-person shooter, where you kill the Nazis and also destroy their wacky high-tech alternate history weaponry. It's a mostly linear first-person shooter affair, but it does have elements of old first-person shooters, like secrets, non-linear exploration, and most importantly, being able to carry more guns than your average modern shooters, a department that Crysis 2 really lacks. Also, I love you Titanfall 2, but how come you can have multiple weapons on your mech, but you don't when on foot? That's pretty stupid, don't you think? Wolfenstein: The New Order was released during the transitionary period of the PS3 and Xbox 360 era and the PS4 Xbox One era, which means that the graphics aren't exactly next gen, but I'll be damned if I say that this isn't atmospheric. This game still looks pretty stunning even to this day. While a lot of the graphical elements look pretty dated compared to a lot of next gen video games these days, it was the atmosphere that managed to capture that gritty alternate history aesthetic that truly sells the game in its visual department without the needs of having 4K texture resolutions all over the place. You do feel the grit and the ruggedness of the alternative time period. You do feel the brutality and the violence being inflicted by the Nazis and the oppressive atmosphere being caused by their presence. And the game is not afraid of being disgusting, showing gore being inflicted not just to your fellow comrades but also between you and those filthy soldiers who absolutely deserve it. That being said, I find it a bit weird that the game considers people speaking foreign accents worthy of a subtitle. The game has the option to give subtitles to only the foreign languages, and by that I mean languages that are not English, which is fine and all, but weirdly enough, the game gives subtitles to Fergus, even though he's British speaking English. Apparently being British is enough to deserve a subtitle because clearly our American-centric minds couldn't make up what the hell they're saying.
Right.
And this isn't the only character that receives the subtitle treatment, so I don't know what you're trying to say by doing all of that, game. And speaking of characters, this brings us to the story. The story content of Wolfenstein: The New Order is surprisingly pretty strong. Both the narrative presentation and the narrative itself is some of the best that first-person shooters have to offer. We do feel with the characters and the issues that they face throughout the journey. We do want them to succeed. We do want them to overcome their struggles and issues. The presentation is concise enough that we're still able to feel feel the emotional weight and the impact without the needs of having exposition all the time. The hospital raid is among some of the best scenes in the game. It shows not only Blasco's perspective of the entire thing, but also his love interest Anya's backstory and her struggles as she and her family try to survive through the Nazi regime. All of that done in a very fast, very quick, but very well narrated flashbacks that give a significant impact to the entire thing. Shockingly enough, I actually buy the love story between the two. While Blasco is still in a vegetative state, Anya taking care of him for 14 years in a very loving and caring manner would definitely instigate some sort of spark, and the love scene between the two ends up being pretty cathartic for the two characters. But I'm just saying, game, one love scene is enough. You're a first-person shooter, not a goddamn visual novel. The rest of the characters are actually pretty strong as well, particularly the one that you saved during the choice in the beginning of the game. No matter who you chose at that point, they will all contemplate in how tiring it is for them and how they are not fit for the job that they're doing. Eventually, the characters develop into appreciating Blasco a lot more, finally seeing him as the glimmer of hope for the resistance against the Nazis. And boy, this game managed to make the Nazis as evil as they can be. Thanks to the game having more narrative and character focus, the Nazis aren't just generic enemies that you shoot to proceed to the next level. The Nazis actually have characters of their own. The story is not very shy in displaying the absolute worst that the Nazis can do to people, and good lord, it can get very squeamish. Even taking the brutality parts out of the way, their personality is so cartoonishly evil, but it works for what the game is trying to do. So, good job, game, for reminding us that these are the kinds of people that we should be afraid of, and not people who disagree with us in social media. I do find Blasco's narration to be a bit more toned down than what I expected. Literally, I mean, because the game for some reason tones the voice volume down by default. When you can actually listen to him, he will narrate a lot of the game through, and some of which are so serious it made me laugh my ass off. There's one point where he acknowledges how the Nazis made it to the moon, and what he said afterwards is so overtly and dramatically absurd. It's like he's breathing in Joker laugh gas for a brief second. That's the thing that I like about Wolfenstein: The New Order. It manages to have a good balance of seriousness and fun, and almost feels like a Guy Ritchie film at times, especially with the direction of the cutscenes, the quick cuts, the transitions, etc. I mean, it's a game where you're riding a giant mech, freeing prisoners from Nazis. It's a game where you travel to a secret moon base while dual-wielding laser rifles and shooting anyone who shills for the Nazis. All of the drama and the seriousness are reserved to make the characters in the game feel more sympathetic, making them to actually have real issues that are relatable to us. The rest of the game, however, is designed to be as ridiculous as possible, so that you don't always have to be gloomy and depressed all the time, as you get to dual-wield assault rifles and tear every living Nazis on a planet. It's a perfect mixture of drama and over-the-top action, the kind of magic that the other games try so hard to recapture and failing. Now let's talk about the gameplay. It's your typical first-person shooter affair. The soldiers shoot you, and you have to shoot back with whatever arsenal that you have. What makes the New Order significantly different compared to other modern shooters, especially at the time, is the fact that you can carry all of the weapons at once, and you can even dual-wield them to your leisure, wiping these enemies as efficiently as possible, despite the accuracy being butchered. All of this is done to maintain the over-the-top violent nature of the game, and Wolfenstein: The New Order is every bit as over-the-top violent as you can get. There's never been a game where you can gun these soldiers in the most gratifyingly satisfying manner ever. When you shoot the enemies, they don't just ragdoll and fell over. Nope, they got shredded into pieces. Their heads got chopped off, their body parts get chopped off. When their head still remains, you can only see their muscles. When their body still remains, you can clearly see its internals being horribly mutilated. Some energy weapons straight up disintegrate enemies into pieces. The violence is almost comical and highlights the over-the-top nature of the game. One of the features that I really love from the New Order is their cover system. If you hold the Alt button, you can move it up and down, left and right, or lean from behind cover in whatever angles that you want. I mean, granted, you cannot move from the cover, but it is such an effective way of making literally everything to be a cover in the game, so that you can be well protected as the enemy soldiers try to gun you down and kill you. The game also has adaptive covers, as in you can approach a nearby wall and press the aim button to peek around the wall, but the adaptive cover only accepts iron sights. You don't need to use iron sights to shoot the enemies accurately, which is an excellent plus, but the adaptive cover does use the iron sight, and you need the adaptive cover for some of the perks in the game. But that brings me to the game's most unnecessary feature, the stealth. To the game's credit, the game offers quite a lot of alternative explorative routes and freedom for the player to proceed through a level. You can find vents, shortcuts, secret routes, any means that will take you from point A to point B. Some of these secret routes have their own secrets as well, including secret health and armor upgrades, and of course collectibles, so the game does reward exploration. You would think that the game's non-linear level design would provide players the means of playing stealthy, and you'd be right, it does. Granted, the stealth is not perfect. The moment one guard notices you, every other guard in the vicinity will, and there's nothing you can do to stop them. If you're stealthing your way with a silenced pistol, you have to either score a headshot or shoot the enemy several times until they stop moving. But you don't have to score a headshot with a knife throw for some reason. The enemies do have a slight delay between noticing you and finally telling everyone, which is great. But here's the thing, the issue isn't really on the fact that the stealth isn't perfect. The issue is the point of playing stealth in general. Now, it is possible for you to get to certain parts of the level using stealth, but this game has the same problem as Deus Ex Human Revolution, or at least before the DLC comes in. There are many situations in which stealth is downright impossible, and you're gonna have to unlearn the things that you learned from stealthing your way in and out of the game in order to get to the intense firefights. Now granted, this isn't really much of a problem because Blasco can tank damages pretty well, or at least on the bring them on difficulty. The problem comes when you have to deal with the upgrade system. How the upgrade system or the perks work is that you have to do certain actions to make sure that you get the perk. Some perks require you to do actions that will force you out of stealth, and some of these are actually pretty necessary in order to proceed through the game, like the ability to have a quick reload. And guess what? Only one of the categories is stealth related, and I'm already close to occupying most of the stealth upgrades. All I'm saying is, there's really no point in stealthing your way through the game when going guns blazing, dual wielding, grenade throwing, and turret spamming enemies left and right yield more fun and also more upgrades. So if you're playing the game for the first time, I recommend not even bothering with stealth. I don't recall any mission where you're gonna be punished severely for not doing stealth, unless if you count the game throwing more Nazis for you to massacre as punishment, and that's punishment in the same way throwing more girls to join your lovemaking session counts as a step towards celibacy. Now let's talk about the PC port. Despite being a really old game, I don't think this game is really that well optimized for the modern platforms. Firstly, I cannot run this game at a consistent 60 FPS on Ultra. Not that you should put everything on Ultra these days, but I can run Crysis 2 on the highest settings and maintain 60 FPS, and that's with textures and graphics mods. I can only run this game on high to maintain a good 60 FPS throughout, and I'm running this on my GTX 1660 Ti laptop. Also, if you're impatient like me, please refrain from pressing the E button multiple times during loading screens, or the game will freaking crash to desktop with zero warning. In conclusion, Wolfenstein: The New Order is good. And it's still good. Compared to a lot of modern shooters, it definitely eclipses them in terms of not just narrative, but gameplay content. The gameplay has its flaws, but it's never been incredibly entertaining and satisfying to gun Nazis down. The narrative is surprisingly pretty strong, with sympathetic and relatable characters and villains that you want to absolutely drown on their own piss. Literally. It's not exactly my favorite first-person shooters of all time, but it does a lot of things right that makes it worthy of a recommendation to everyone. And yes, I absolutely recommend this game. This game cost $20 at the time of writing, and it's definitely worth every penny if you ask me. The campaign is about 6 to 7 hours long, so it's not exactly the longest, but it is definitely the right length for what this game is trying to do. There are secrets, collectibles, extra modes, multiple difficulty options, tons of replay value. If you haven't gotten a chance to play this game, go play this one and just forget the rest.